Now, folks, if you'll just gather around a little closer now. Come right in a little closer. That's it. That's fine, folks.
All right, let's go, because you know what I came in to do.
I don't get paid for overtime. I'm here to fight.
So we concede. Errol Spence sold more pay-per-view buys than Terence Crawford. Common opponent, and probably the best opponent for both guys, perhaps, is Sean Porter. Errol Spence was tracking towards 350,000, depending which source you go to, and Terence Crawford did about 135 against Porter. But with numbers like what Errol Spence is doing, humbleness is still required. They're not the biggest numbers that the top American boxers have posted up. Not even top 10. And then added on to that, you have the pro PBC, pro Spence media and the fan base talking about this is an A-side fighter. Selling more than a potential opponent does not necessarily make you an A-side fighter. It might give you leverage over certain opponents in negotiation, yes. But A-side is reserved for boxers who can cover the whole shebang. Cover your purse as an A-side fighter and cover your opponent's purse as B-side. Cover the whole shebang. And Errol Spence hasn't been able to do that with Terence Crawford. He can do that with Danny Garcia. He can A-side Danny Garcia, but that's not what you call A-siding. A-siding is used for big boy action. Yeah, he can do that with Campos and people like that. I mean, I think his split with Sean Porter, the guaranteed splits, were almost identical. He probably got a little more than Sean Porter on the pay-per-view revenue, but not that much more. Yeah, against Stanionis, he will be the A-side, because it's unlikely that Stanionis will clear much more than $1 million when he fights him. That's why he can A-side Stanionis. What does that make him, Sugar Ray Leonard? What does that make him, Oscar De La Hoya? No, it doesn't. What does that make him, Floyd Mayweather? No, it doesn't. Because when it counted for undisputed against the pound-for-pound consensus number 1 or 2, the fight wasn't made. Spence has never looked comfortable or suited for the I'm the A-side bootleg Mayweather impersonations that he's been aiming at Terence Crawford. You're on the wrong side of the street. You need to get a belt. I'm taking 70% because I'm the A-side and you're the B-side. Well, according to Mike Coppinger, Terence was prepared to take a very low split of the net, not the gross, of the net. That's recent. It's been 4 years since Terence Crawford got that belt that Errol Spence said he needed. 4 years and no fight has materialized. It's been nearly a year since Terence Crawford left Top Rank, which was supposedly a stumbling block because he was on the wrong side of the street. We have no fight. So let's not pretend that Terence Crawford is walking away from a 1 month negotiation that went bad. No, there is a paper trail of demands and requirements, mostly from Errol Spence and the PBC, for Terence to fulfill, and the fight will happen. We have no fight. So Terence isn't just walking off into this Avanesyan fight without trying really hard to make this fight. That's just not the case. How is Terence Crawford being blamed for this fight not happening, when earlier this year you had Tim Smith, Vice President of Communications for the PBC, saying Terence Crawford has not been built into a pay-per-view attraction. That's why this fight isn't happening. Well, hold on. Were Robert Guerrero, Madonna, Floyd's opponent's pay-per-view attractions? No, but Floyd covered the whole effing shebang. And if you're going to be calling this guy an A-side fighter, he's not doing that. It shouldn't matter if Terence Crawford is a big draw or a pay-per-view attraction, because Spence is that. He's the A-side, right? You guys say he's the A-side. He's the star. Well, you cover the purse then. It should be easy work. Nobody was asking Felix Trinidad to go out and sell a bunch of tickets outside so they can make the De La Hoya fight. Nah, Oscar's got this covered. The gate and the PPV. Oscar has it covered. So how do we go from the Vice President of Communications earlier this year telling us why the fight couldn't happen? Piracy, niggas is going to steal it, and that Terence Crawford isn't a big enough draw, to, oh well, Terence just doesn't want the fight. No consistency. Adrian Broner even said it.
They can't even promise Earl and Terence no guarantees. The fuck?
Do you think Adrian Broner just guessed or just plucked that from out the air? Or he got that from a real source? Not a source that the Errol Spence fans claim to have, but a real source. This man fights on the PBC. Yeah, it's Terence Crawford's fault. I tell you what, the PBC fan base have got the shortest memories ever. Wasn't it 2 weeks ago Floyd said that the fight's not happening, it's going to happen down the future? Didn't he say that? And when the PBC, brasses, Heyman, or maybe Tim Smith, heard what he said, they said, you need to clean it up. The fans are mad already, and now you're telling them fights ain't happening. Clean it up. And he comes out and said the fight's in December. But anyone with half a brain knew that the fight's not going to happen in December. You already told us a couple of times this year that the fight's not happening. That was a clean-up job. Clean up the spillage. Tell you what, Crawford ain't going to do no big numbers against David Avanesyan in America. The saving grace for it is that it's in Omaha, Nebraska, his hometown. And he always does good numbers there. Even Bob Arum would attest to that. But that's not going to do pay-per-view in America. On Black Prime, a streaming site. Look, the only streaming site or app of any note right now covering boxing is DAZN. That Fight Network, that hasn't popped off like that. 10 million is a lot. Do they mean upwards to 10 million? Or that's what he gets? I don't know. It's a bigger fight in the UK. But I don't think Black Prime will be streaming in the UK. What I read earlier today is BT Queensbury will be broadcasting the fight in the UK because Avanesyan is signed to Frank. And Avanesyan is a name in Britain, in Europe. Destroyed Josh Kelly, destroyed the Spanish kid, the unbeaten knockout artist Lizarraga, for the European title, and is arguably the best welter in Europe. And a lot of us would have liked Conor Benn to fight Avanesyan rather than all this Eubank shit and VADA nonsense. So Avanesyan has notoriety out here. Frank Warren had him fighting relatively mediocre opposition on nondescript cards, which hasn't done his profile no good. But yo, Terrence is doing what he's got to do to feed his picnic them and his family. Can't be mad at that. Hope he gets the 10 mil. You know, Spence is talking about, oh, he could have fought in November and how hard it is for him to make welterweight. Like, Terrence is holding him up. Well, if it's that hard to make welter, why is he defending his belts against Stanionis? Why didn't he just move up to 154? I explained it the other day. When everybody was worried about Devin against George Kambosos because he looked skeletal, almost ghost-like, I said he'll be okay. He'll be okay. Once he rehydrates, he'll be okay. And look, it could have went pear-shaped, but I had a feeling it wouldn't. Why? Because fighters on Devin Haney's level can overcome a little discomfort of making the weight because he's a superior boxer to George Kambosos, who's a good fighter. But if he tries that against Shakur Stevenson, he could find himself in real trouble, boiling down like that to fight Shakur. Just like Errol Spence. Like, okay, look, if he's saying he's drained at the weight, you don't fight Terence Crawford if you're drained at 147. You need to leave it alone. You could get hurt bad. I know some of you would like to believe that Spence and his camp are really looking forward to fighting Terence Crawford. Well, I'm here to tell you, no, they are not. And hearing that news there, that it's a real struggle to make 147, you believe Derek James wants to see this guy bow down and take Terence Crawford on? Well, listen, live in your own world. You can't get in my head with that bullshit because it's nonsense. 2 fights since 2019, issues with the weight. Seriously, yeah, go fight Stanionis. You can get away with it with Stanionis. Sometimes you see Errol looking really chunky, alleged issues with drinking, and a lot of people are not sure he's recovered from the car crash. We're never going to see this fight. Trust me. Forget all this tune-up. Tune-up for what? The fight isn't happening. That goes for Spence and Crawford. Crawford should be fighting Virgil Ortiz. And Spence should be fighting Boots Ennis. Why don't you take on Ortiz? Why don't you take on Boots? Why don't you take on Boots? Why don't you take on Ortiz? This guy talking about it's hard to make the weight. Well, why didn't you make the fight when it should have been made? At a more appropriate time when you weren't struggling at the weight. Why was you fucking about? Both of them are explaining or throwing shade on each other why the fight isn't happening. I don't want to hear either of them, to be honest. I don't want to hear either of them. The fight's not happening. Move on. Take your next fights. So Spence, he's saying Crawford has been stalling for months. He could have fought in November, is what he tweeted recently. He's been fighting at this weight for over a decade. The shit ain't easy or fun. Well, move up. Move up. No one cares about this fight no more. Move up. And in the boxing scene, he said everyone can now see who was the hold-up. Really? And Crawford said, I agreed to all their bullshit, and they've been dragging their asses for months. Now, we know that's true. Spence was nowhere to be found while I was trying to make the deal, according to Crawford. He explained to Al Heyman and Errol that I was going to fight before the end of the year since they want to continue to drag their ass. I'm going to fight another champion who actually has the balls to fight me. David Avanesyan is a very tough task. He's knocked out his last 6 opponents, and this guy's dangerous. Once I'm successful against Avanesyan, my plan is still the same: whoop Errol Spence's ass. And you see, because Crawford's fight got announced first against Avanesyan, it's very convenient for the Errol Spence fans to say, look, you see, he ran away. This is why Errol is fighting Stanionis. Well, do I really believe that Stanionis' name came up as soon as Crawford's fight was announced with Avanesyan? No, I don't. They've been planning this for a long time. It's in-house. Richard Schaefer, he has a piece of the Lithuanian. Schaefer was there at the AT&T when Stanionis beat Butev on the undercard of Spence and Ugas. Really? I mean, don't play games. Let's not play games here. Who promotes Stanionis? Tom Brown.
Who's that? Brown.
Now, it's Spence's mandatory, and it's a good fight, but it's no better than the Avanesyan fight. Avanesyan has the stronger resume. American fans, not all American fans, but a lot of them are concerned that they've never heard of David Avanesyan, although he's fought and beat Shane Mosley in America. He lost a points decision to Lamont Peterson on Mayweather Promotions on Showtime, which is basically PBC. Bob Arum cards against War Machine. Look, he's no more obscure to America than Stanionis, but trust me, if Spence fights Stanionis, they're going to be telling us what a great fight it is, but Avanesyan is a cherry pick. It's just a lot of hypocrisy. A hot fight has a 2-year window to be made. 2-year window at the most, or the alarm signals have to be going off. Like, Leonard won his title November 1979 against Benitez at 147. Tommy won his around August 1980. By September 81, they were fighting for the undisputed welterweight title. So the fight didn't become something that was in demand until Tommy won his belt, August 1980. Within the next year, the fight was made, 1981. Leonard was 25, Tommy was 22. Spence has had his belt since May 2017 when he took out Kell Brook up in Sheffield. 5 years. Crawford won his belt, let's say 10 months later, when he stopped Jeff Horn, who comes to upset against Pacquiao. So we go from when Crawford had the belt, let's say June 2018. That's over 4 years. Crawford is 35, Spence is 32. The 2-year window has now become a 4-year window. The window is now broken. It's 2022, and the fight hasn't happened. Terence Crawford is 35. He won his belt when he was 31. Errol Spence is 32. He won his belt when he was 27. This one is dead in the water, people. It's dead. And I think this week is the official death of Crawford and Spence. You know, when you blow things out of proportion, it's a bad place to start when you want to build something. You know, I'm not trying to disrespect Errol Spence when I say he's not an A-side fighter. I'm looking at it historically and what an A-side fighter does for boxing. He changes the landscape. He changes lives. Not just for himself, but his opponents. There's no need to blow things out of proportion. And I think that's hurt this fight badly. Letting Spence walk around, man down productions, I'm the A-side, I'm this, I'm that. Really? You're not all that, bro. And ultimately, he sounded frustrated when he was talking about, oh, he's got to make the weight. Crawford's holding him up. To me, that seemed like boxing was taking a toll on him more than any decision that Terence Crawford made in concerns to this next fight. I mean, Terence Crawford is 35. What did people want him to do? Stick around negotiating a fight for how long? They've been negotiating the fight since Crawford's left Top Rank. It's over now. You know, like people were talking about Joshua didn't want to fight Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury gave him, what, a couple of days to sign the contract and fight. It's ridiculous. This has took near a year. But yet, he sent contracts to Derek Chisora, which Derek rejected a couple of months ago, and then sent him fresh ones up to a few weeks back. How come Derek Chisora gets a couple of months to work it out and Joshua gets a couple of days? It's time to move on. This is what I'm saying. When you blow things out of proportion, you lose perspective because you've got two different trains of thought coming out. You've got Tim Smith. They're going to pirate the fight. They're not going to buy it. Crawford is not a pay-per-view attraction. And then you had Leonard Ellerby and his cheerleaders talking about Spencer Crawford is a bigger fight than Canelo and Golovkin. Well, Canelo and Golovkin went and gone. Finished. If you wanted to prove this was a bigger fight, you should have made it. But like I've been saying from a long time ago, they spent so much time telling us that this fight isn't big because of Terence Crawford, and now you want to argue it's the biggest thing ever. And then they're dismissing it out of sight. What about the discussion if it was a bigger fight than Triple G and Canelo? How did that come up? After years you said the fight was a dud. Now it's a bigger fight than Triple G and Canelo. Well, that done and went. If you wanted to prove it was a better fight, you should have made the fight. You know, Mayweather, his part in it was just bizarre. Popping up telling us, nah, the fight's not happening until down the future. Then, yeah, it's going to happen in December. Well, what's going on? You just got a bunch of crazies there. And unless you're a real fanatical fan of the fighters, you can't even see how mad and chaotic it is over there. Because you don't have a solid position, you're just randomly saying things that contradict what you said last time. And now, there's no fight. There's no fight. There was no plan. There was no sit down and work this out properly. It was just all sound bites and damage control to make Crawford look bad. And don't be surprised if there's a heavy backlash with the Stanionis fight and Spence doesn't do over 100 buys. Because the fans, no matter how much they support Spence and the rest of them, must be thinking, well, Stephen Espinosa told us not to listen to the naysayers in the media saying the fight's not going to happen. We're working on it. It's going to happen. Where's Stephen? You had Crawford there, no strings attached, and you couldn't deliver. Bottom line. How the f*** are you going to shit on Terence when you bypassed the Crawford fight to fight Mikey Garcia, to fight Ugas? Told Terence it's 70-30, go get a belt. Had to endure all this bullshit, not just from Spence, but the fan base and media. And now Crawford's doing his own thing. You want to throw shade on him? I was relieved that Terence Crawford took this fight. I was relieved. Get on with your career. And Spence, get on with yours.